Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Historians Lounge here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I'm your host, Gabriel Garcia. Many of you know me as the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill. And joining us back on the show is a very good friend of mine and fellow historian. And in today's episode, we're actually be talking about an upcoming book of his releasing later this year. And it's on a topic that I don't have a lot of experience on or a lot of knowledge on, but I'm very excited to dive into it. So let's give a huge round of applause to our returning Wandering Scribe alumni, my good friend and fellow historian, Al Dickinson. Al, welcome back to the show.
Thanks for having me, Gabriel. It's great to be back.
Awesome, Al. So glad to have you back on the show. Now, before we dive into our questions for today, can you share with the viewers and listeners a quick little update of what you've been up to since the last time you were on the show, as well as your upcoming book, which is releasing later this year?
Absolutely. So it's been a couple of years since I've been on the show, but and most of that time has been dedicated to working on the book. So this is a book about Milwaukee's historic Catholic churches. The idea was kind of to write an encyclopedia, as I like to call it, of Milwaukee's historic Catholic churches to help preserve their history and their cultural impact. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of the churches merging or being torn down, being turned into other, being sold to other denominations, that sort of thing. And so I wanted to take the time to, like I said, preserve some of this history, particularly through some predominantly historic photos, but also some modern ones, and then, just brief histories of each of these churches.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I guess let's start with our very first question, the founding history of the churches in Milwaukee. So what were some of the circumstances that led to the establishment of Milwaukee's earliest Catholic churches? Because for those that don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, Al, but Milwaukee is known as a city of steeples because of the amount of churches that are in Milwaukee.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's absolutely correct. Milwaukee has, at its peak, the peak population in the mid-century, in 1950s, 60s, had one of the highest per capita rates of churches to people in the nation. And a lot of them obviously have steeples. A lot of Catholic churches have steeples, but also we have beautiful Lutheran and Presbyterian churches and everything else as well. And so the idea, the founding of Milwaukee is also very interesting. It's where three rivers meet. It's about the Menominee, Kinnickinnick, and Milwaukee's rivers all meet in what is today downtown Milwaukee. And that was a hub of trade and development for centuries. The Native Americans used it as a trading hub. The French, after French explorers and French missionaries came, they started using it as a trading hub, and then of course it became a fairly major city with the passage of the Northwest Ordinance and everything in the late 17th and early 1900s. As Europeans moved west, Americans moved west and northwest from like the Ohio River Valley into the Great Lakes region.
All right. Fascinating. Fascinating. And I had a chance to look at your sort of like overview of your book from the cover that you sent me. Seems to me that, as we'll probably discuss later in this episode, that a lot of churches draw upon a lot of varying architectural styles. So, from your research, what architectural styles stand out in Milwaukee's historic Catholic churches, and what do they reveal about the time periods in which they were constructed?
Yeah, there were a couple of. I'll address the first part of the question, and maybe I'll have you repeat the second part. But there were several architectural styles that are very prominent in Milwaukee and very, unique. One of them is what they call the German Zopfstil. I'm not sure. I'm probably not saying that correctly, but it's spelled Zopfstil. Zopfstil. It was the German response to American federalism styles of architecture. So it was prominent in the mid 1800s, so 1850, 1860s, that sort of region. It's characterized by their largely square or rectangular structures. They're very angular, very straight and narrow. There's not a lot of there aren't very many artistic flourishes to that style of building. And we had a prominent architect, Victor Schulte. He was Pennsylvania-born German of German ancestry. He came to Milwaukee after having a pretty good career in Philadelphia, and he designed 3 of the earliest churches in Milwaukee. St. Mary's, which is now called Old St. Mary's. It was built before Wisconsin even became a state. So it was built in 1846. And it's the oldest church in the city. Oldest church still standing, I should say. And then he also designed the cathedral of St. John the Evangelist, which is still the seat of the Milwaukee's Archbishop. And then he also designed a couple of years later Church Holy Trinity, which was on the south side of Milwaukee, south of downtown, in what was then called Walker's Point. Milwaukee was originally a merger of 3 different towns, Juneau Town, Kilbourne Town, and Walker's Point, and they all merged in the late 1830s, early 1840s into what is today the city of Milwaukee. But anyways, so that was Victor Schulte. We have, outside of Philadelphia, we have probably the most prominent collection of Victor Schulte designed buildings, with those 3 churches being highlights. And so, like I said, Zopfstil is a very unique architectural style that we feature here heavily in Milwaukee, and it makes sense too, because Milwaukee was a predominantly German city for so many years, for decades. That and or the Poles were always vying for how many descendants they had here in the city. So that, I think, answers the first part of your question. But if you wouldn't mind repeating sort of that second part, that'd be great.
Oh, yes, absolutely. So the second part of this question, Al, was, from these different architectural styles, what do they reveal about the time periods in which they were constructed?
Absolutely. Well, like I illustrated with the Zopfstil style, it was primarily brought over by German immigrants, Germans trying to recreate a sense of home within their new community. But the same can be said for various other architectural styles that you see throughout the city, whether that's Gothic or Victorian, or we had one of the very few examples of an ecumenical building designed in a stick style, which was a sort of a late Queen Anne, late 1800s, like 1880s, 1890s style, where it's very artistic wooden finishings, and they have kind of imagine like rustic, like a rustic cabin, but turned into a church. It's a very unique style, and Holy Rosary is the name of that church. Is the only church that I'm aware of that has that sort of architectural design, and so it really showcases Milwaukee's innovation in a way for designing some of these churches and using sort of some of these unique materials. A lot of the churches, a lot of buildings in Milwaukee are just built with what they call cream city brick, which is a brick like you normally see, but due to the soil content of the Milwaukee area, instead of taking on a reddish hue that you would normally see, or a rust-colored hue that you normally see with a brick, it's a more cream, more yellowish, tannish color. And again, it just showcases sort of the uniqueness and innovation of Milwaukee's architects and Milwaukee residents, designing and building and financing some of these churches.
Nice, very, very nice. And now, as you mentioned before, I mean, this famous architect is like ingrained in Milwaukee's history and culture. But I'm very curious: are there other notable individuals, whether maybe some priests, or maybe some bishops, or maybe some other architects, who also played pivotal roles in the creation of these early churches?
Absolutely. So obviously, the first one would be Archbishop Henny, Henni. He was the first bishop of Milwaukee, and he really got the ball rolling in Milwaukee for development of churches. He was a bishop and then later promoted to archbishop from the 1840s until the late 1880s. So he had a good long stint being in charge of the area. He had a good long stint of archbishopric. Always one of my favorite words, by the way. Anyways, and he designed. He didn't design, but he promoted various churches being built. He had called for different religious orders, different ethnic communities to come to Milwaukee to design their own churches, to have a home here in Milwaukee. The idea was, you'll have a place here in Milwaukee while you're also ecumenically, you'll have a place here in Milwaukee, you'll have a spot to go to church, but you'll also be contributing to the larger community as a whole through your skilled tradesmanship or through your, engineering ideas or whatever. Through your labor, you will be contributing to the greater community, and also having a home in all of these different churches. So, like I say, he called on the Capuchin monks to come, and they developed a church. They developed a monastery here. He called for the Palatines to come. They established a foothold in the western end of Milwaukee. Like I said, various different ethnic groups, whether they're Poles or Germans or Italians and others, they all came to Milwaukee as well. And each of them had their own sort of church home, if that makes sense. There wasn't a lot of intermixing between the various groups in a church setting. Obviously, they were all under the umbrella of the archdiocese, but they largely kept their own unique identities as individual groups, and then as such, you're able to see various different takes on different architectural styles or different approaches to community life or ecumenical life or Catholic teaching that spread across the city. So Bishop Henny would definitely be one prominent figure in the early church of Milwaukee. Again, there were a couple architects, Victor Schulte, Henry Mesmer, a couple others come to mind as being predominant architects that designed multiple churches. Maybe one of the other big names would be Erhard Braillemeyer. He was the guy who designed, he was a German born, or one of the German states born. I don't remember which state off the top of my head. he designed the Basilica of St. Josaphat, which was at the time of construction, 1880s into the early 90s. Or I'm sorry, 1890s into the early 1900s. I believe it was finished construction in 1901 or 1902. It was the second largest, had the second largest dome of any building in the nation, behind only the United States Capitol. And it still is up there. It's maybe, I don't know, the seventh or the ninth or something like that, largest dome in the nation. And he designed or contributed design elements to a number of other churches as well, and a variety of different styles. So he would definitely be a very prominent architect. He would definitely be a very unique person to study. I'm actually mildly surprised there aren't any. He's not taught more thoroughly in architectural schools, and that there aren't any, biographies or even very few scholarly articles about him. You can find some things in local Milwaukee publications, magazines, and newspapers, but to the best of my knowledge, there aren't very many, like I say, biographies or scholarly articles looking at his life or also his work. With, like I say, he had some fantastic designs or contributions to some just beautiful churches in the area. And he wasn't just a Milwaukee-born or a Milwaukee-based artist. He did buildings in Madison. He did buildings in Chicago and all over the nation. And like I said, he would definitely be one of Milwaukee's claims to fame in terms of architectural design.
Nice. And kind of going back to what you talked about community, as you mentioned earlier, that Milwaukee kind of started out as three separate towns that sort of came in together. So in what way did these historic churches sort of shape the growth of local immigrant communities, particularly among, the Polish, German, and the Irish populations?
Absolutely. Like I said, Milwaukee started off as three towns. By the time that these churches were developed, it was more or less one unified city in Milwaukee. But that doesn't mean that there wasn't work to do in terms of bringing the immigrants into the fold, so to speak. These churches served primarily as social hubs for these different ethnic groups. So, Sunday was the day of rest. Sunday was the day of worship. You'd have everybody in your community, all of your relatives, all of your friends, all the people from your neighborhood. They would all come to church. They would all come to a single church, and that's where they would have their gatherings. That's where they would be able to communicate, see each other on a regular basis. Kids would play, parents would, chat, work would be established, that sort of thing. And beyond just the church aspect of it too, like I said, it provided a social, provided the social life of a lot of these early immigrants. A lot of them still spoke the mother tongue, whether that's Polish or German or Italian, Croatian, whatever. So a lot of these people still spoke the same language that they might not be able to speak at the factory down the street, because at the factory down the street, they're working with all the above, whereas
Right.
at church, they're just focusing on one particular group. And as such, too, that's also so it was like the late 1800s, so 1860s, 70s, 80s, that's when a lot of these churches started establishing their own schools as well. And that's where the German parents would send their children to Old St. Mary's school to learn their lessons in German. Maybe they would also be taught English at the same time, but the predominant language that would be spoken in the school would be German, just like it would be at home. Same thing with the Italians or the Polish, Croatians, Hungarians, whatever. And so, like I said, while your work, while your weekday life, so to speak, is incorporating um, all of these different ethnic groups together, and all of these different uh, you know religious experiences, because obviously you'd be working with non-Catholics as well. You'd be working with Lutherans, or
Right.
you'd be working with Presbyterians, or whoever. uh, on Sunday, that cultural, um, the culturally significant things to your background would all be established right there in this hub of your social life, which would be church.
Fascinating. Very, very fascinating. And this kind of goes now into something that I think is very important to talk about, which is about art and iconography in these historic early churches. So, this question will probably be broken up into two parts, Al. So, the first part of this question is, what significant works of art or religious symbols can be found in these churches?
Absolutely. The one that comes to mind, and really the only one that I would say has um, real historic significance, aside from being just a very cool piece of artwork. There's a painting in Old St. Mary's. It was gifted by King Ludwig of Prussia to the archdiocese,
Ooh.
to that church, in because it did such a service to the German immigrants that were coming from Prussia at the time. So it was gifted in the 1840s or maybe early 50s. Like I say, it was very um, it's a painting painted by Franz Glick. He was a court painter, uh, relatively well known but not well studied. A painting of the Annunciation. Uh, and like I say, it's just a beautiful painting that would, like I say, it would. If I had to put a tack in what would be the most famous Milwaukee artwork, or Catholic Milwaukee artwork, that would definitely be it. Because, like I said, it has such a fascinating history, with it being a gift from a king
Yeah.
to also being, like I said, just a beautiful piece of artwork. So that would be, like I said, that would be the most prominent historic piece of artwork. There are other things like on one side of St. Stanislaus Church, on Milwaukee's south side, there was um, there's a mosaic of Our Lady of Czestochowa, which is, I believe, the largest mosaic of Our Lady of Czestochowa in the world. But it's beautiful, but it's not, again, it's one of those things that's not particularly well known. Our Lady
Mm.
of Czestochowa is not a prominent um, our artist symbol that we use to depict Mary anymore. It was much more prominent 100 years ago than it is today.
Okay. All right. And the second part of this question is, from these different, mosaics and symbols, what do they signify regarding the Catholic faith and Milwaukee's cultural heritage?
Sure, that's a great question. I mean, again, I would have to say that these paintings, well, maybe they're not, or mosaics and stone carvings and whatever else, maybe they're not, world famous pieces of artwork, but they so often were done by the community themselves. They were done by parishioners of the church, either by their own hand, via skilled tradesmen, or through financing. They would pass the basket, and how much money can we get? If we get this much money, we can afford to get this different type of material that will elevate this piece of artwork. And so I think that while, like I say, they're not necessarily world famous pieces of art, they are very important aspects of the church communities. And there's something that a lot of the parish members can take pride in. A lot of them are still standing, 100 or 150 years later. And that just speaks to the quality of craftsmanship, but also the love and care that they've, received from parishioners and descendants of parishioners, that has taken care of them and has preserved them.
Well said. Very true, Alan. Very true. And as we all know, as you kind of mentioned earlier in this episode, the churches are always seen, no matter where you go in the United States, churches are seen as like the central hub, the community hub for like a neighborhood or like a small town. And the parishioners always try to keep it alive with, like cultural events or school events. And I know that firsthand. I went to a Catholic middle school. My church was St. Anthony's for St. Hyacinth's Academy. And there was always either like a bake sale or like community, I don't want to say community shopping, but like a community like Goodwill kind of event that always happened, trying to give back to the community. And so with that in mind, because Milwaukee is so culturally diverse with the different immigrant communities, what types of cultural or community events have historically taken place in Milwaukee at these churches, and how have they enriched the social fabric of the city?
That's a great question, and one that I have a very easy answer for, because it's so true. It's the various ethnic festivals that Milwaukee has. So Milwaukee is known as the city of festivals. We have Summerfest, and then on the Summerfest grounds we have Polish Fest, Irish Fest, Festa Italiana, all these different ethnic festivals, and they all stem from the original Festa Italiana, which was done by parishioners of the Blessed Virgin of Pompeii Church, downtown Milwaukee. It started as a way to celebrate Saint Rocco's Day, who was a prominent saint in the Italian communities. And they would have a street festival and a parade, and people selling their wares, and it was just a fantastic community building experience, but also a good way to give back to the church. And then beyond that, a way to experience Italian culture. And as such, that grew into what is now today Festa Italiana. But then all the other churches around also, or all the other ethnic groups around also said, you know what, that's a really good idea. So that's why we end up having, like I said, German Fest and Polish Fest, Irish Fest. There's a Native American version. There's a Mexican version. There's just all these different groups of people. And you can see it now too. There are anytime a new group comes to Milwaukee, a new group in any significant quantity, they want their own festival as well, because they want to share their culture. So in the last few 10 or 15 years, we've seen Puerto Rican Fest, and we've seen Indian Fest, and things like that. And it's like, it's really fascinating to see how these ethnic festivals have integrated themselves into the social fabric of Milwaukee, while also using it as a way to preserve their heritage from wherever they came from, sharing it with new people, while also giving everybody a chance to experience the language or the cuisine or the different fashion styles and things like that make these cultures unique.
Absolutely, well said. And it's also a way to like bridge like the gap between those that are outside of these communities to those that are within these communities, because sometimes it's these events are the only ways to bridge the two together, to showcase the best of both, and to also talk about Milwaukee's, deep heritage. I mean, we can even look at a comparison to New York and the five boroughs. I mean, in each
Yep.
borough, there's a different ethnic community that is made home. I mean, you got, you know, Little Italy, you got Chinatown, you
Yep.
got Harlem, and it's so very, very fascinating. And when you go into Miami, you got Little Havana too, which is its own community as well. We're just trying to blend both the cultures that they had back home with the cultures they have made here in the US, which is, I think absolutely very, very beautiful. Now, this next
Absolutely.
question, thank you. This next question talks about something that you brought up earlier, Al, and that's of course, these churches, which some of them are very, very old indeed, that some have been unfortunately had been taken down because it's not safe to either repair or the foundation's not good, or just because they're just making new ways for new churches or maybe an updated church. So from your research, what obstacles have Milwaukee's historic Catholic churches faced concerning maintenance and preservation over the years?
Absolutely. There are a couple of things that are um, bigger hurdles for Catholic churches in Milwaukee. Obviously, cost of repairs or the amount of repairs is a big one. Like I said, a lot of these we still have a ton of churches in the city that are 100 or 150 years old. The church I belong to is almost 140 years old. So there's obviously a lot of repair work that has to be done, and that costs money, and that costs talent and time and things like that as well, which can be hard to come by at times. And then the other one, probably the biggest, difficulty is the demographic shift. So over the last 50 years, we've seen a lot of people not going to church, and the fewer people that go to church, the fewer people give money to the church. Again, churches are nonprofits, so they don't have a revenue stream coming in aside from the parishioners' donations, at least not for the most part. Maybe a few services that they might provide, but that's really been the biggest issue in terms of preservation. That's something that we've seen. I mean, we've seen it off and on for since the archdiocese was established in the 1840s. But it's been a long period now for the last, like I said, 50 or so years. And there are hard times too where there are churches that just weren't able to be repaired, or the cost to repair them was so prohibitive. It's cheaper to tear it down and build a brand new one instead of fix the old one. One example of that is Milwaukee South Side here, St. John Canty. It had a poor foundation, like you mentioned, and so the building was essentially splitting in half.
Oh no!
In one of the photos that I saw, they had to install what they call tie bars across the nave of the church, big steel or iron bars to hold the church together instead of letting it fall to either side. And obviously that's just a temporary fix, but they did that for a couple of years until they raised enough money to build a new church next door, which still stands today. And that was, that happened, I don't know, probably 60 or so years ago at this point. So, like I said, there are a couple of different ways that the preservation of the actual buildings has become challenging. And then, preserving communities, again, is also a challenge. You're relying a lot on, people knowing their own family history and still living in the same general area, especially with the suburbanization of America over the last 50, 75 years. A lot of people have moved out of the cities and into suburbs. And you're also seeing at some point too, when you have at some point, it's not unexpected that people will, I'm not going to say forget, but not find their cultural heritage super important. Again, for the Italian immigrants that came here in the 1890s, well, we're 130 years later. How many generations do you expect to belong to the same churches? Does that, if that makes sense? So there's some good questions to ask about preserving, like I said, the individual communities, but I don't have good answers for them for those
Absolutely.
questions either.
Absolutely, Al. Absolutely. And we only have about just 10 minutes left. So I'm just going to combine the last few of these questions together into much bigger ones. And they actually do
Sure.
kind of work well together. So as we talked about, a lot of important things on, about the history of these historic churches in, Milwaukee. I'm very curious. How have the religious practices and I'm probably going to butcher this, the Gurukul celebration in these churches evolved, especially with the dynamics shifting, with urbanization in these, various communities, as well as, embodying the larger story of American Catholicism. Because for many people who do not know or are unfamiliar with the history of American Catholicism in the United States, it actually was, correct me if I'm wrong, Al, was a lot later in history because predominantly America, beginning with the 13 colonies, were Protestant. We didn't really have an influx of Catholics coming to the United States until, I want to say, the first wave of immigration.
Definitely. So there's a couple, obviously there's a lot in that question, or a couple of questions. First, I'll say that you're correct that predominantly America has been historically a Protestant nation, beginning with 13 colonies. I will point out that some colonies, Maryland, for example, was designed to be the Catholic colony, and then there were other colonies, the Dutch colonies, and what became the Pennsylvania, under William Penn, who advocated for religious freedom. There were a lot of Catholics in those areas as well. But beyond that, they're the Catholics. I would say that probably the Catholics and Lutherans in our nation's history were the two most prominent missionaries. They're the ones that predominantly headed west, into the Midwest and then towards the Pacific. There have been a variety of different changes in how Milwaukee Catholics have changed their practices. Again, a lot of churches focused on whatever language was designed to be, whatever language was their designated ethnic group. But obviously that also changed, like during Vatican II. Before that, all of the churches, everything was said in Latin, except maybe the homily, which was said in the native language. And now it's like I said, since Vatican II in the 1960s, almost everything is said in either English or Spanish.
Yes.
With a few other, in Milwaukee, there are a few other language groups that still exist. There still is a Polish mass in Milwaukee for the few old Poles that still go there, and things like that. But for the most part, it was been turned into English or Spanish. And then beyond that, too, Milwaukee has some other interesting quirks about it. Milwaukee was one of the first, cities or first archdiocese to heavily recruit African American Catholics. So we had an African American Catholic church here in Milwaukee, St. Benedict the Moor, since the 19 teens. And as urbanization happened throughout the 20th century, a lot of African Americans moved down to Milwaukee's north side, and that's where you see a lot of different changes in how the liturgical practices developed. In particular, for example, there was one church, Holy Angels, which is on the north side of predominantly African American church. It's thought to be the first Catholic church in the nation that incorporated gospel music into the worship services. And obviously I'm not going to say that's a prominent way of worship in a Catholic church today across the nation or across the world, but there are Black gospel Catholic churches throughout the United States, and like I say, having Milwaukee be one of the first, if not one of the first, in the 1950s and 60s, that's a pretty stark development for how the liturgy and how the religious practices have changed.
Absolutely, Al. Absolutely. And I guess only to wrap up this incredible discussion, as we kind of talked about and hinted at a little bit, these churches have also led to the establishment of their own schools, a lot of private schools for the communities to send their children to not only have them learn their native tongues and still keep it within the community, but also still get an education. We also see, as years have gone on, the rise of other religious communities that have emerged, not just in Milwaukee, but across the whole United States. And there's so many questions just from exploring this topic on the history of Milwaukee's Catholic churches that we could also apply to other communities that have a lot of Catholic denominations or Christian denominations. Ultimately, at the end of the day, when this book releases, what do you hope readers will take away, not just on the scholarship, but also the important lessons or message that it may convey?
That's a good question. I don't know if I've necessarily thought about that a ton. What I'm hoping that the readers will take away. Like I said, I started this journey, this book, like I say, attempting to create an encyclopedia of Milwaukee's historic Catholic churches. These are very brief histories of, I think I got about 70 churches that I talk about. Some more heavily than others based off of available records and whatnot. But I guess there are a couple lessons that are really important and really that stick out to me. There's a resourcefulness that a lot of these communities had to establish via, whether that's, again, finding the right amount of money or the right materials, or, some of these people, I've read stories or heard, oral histories of people who, faced terrible consequences for coming here, coming to America, and they were, leaving with nothing but the clothes on their back, and they came here and they established themselves, and I think that's a great story to tell. So that sort of resourcefulness and perseverance aspect of it. Beyond that, too, what I would like readers to take away is sort of I would like people to be intrigued by their own history. I'm not asking people to necessarily go out and write books about all these parishes, but that would be a great start. My book is not a definitive history of all these churches. My book is I'd like to think of it as a starting point for other readers, a starting point for other readers to, like I say, explore their personal history, whether they're Catholic and have fallen away from the church, whether they're a member of one of these ethnic communities and they don't know the history of this church that their grandparents belong to or whatever. Well, here's an opportunity for you to learn a little bit more about it, and at the same time to provide some sort of catharsis. Even if you're, you moved away from the city, or again, you're not Catholic at all, or not anymore, or whatever. Can you learn something about the history of where you come from, so that way you're better informed about where you're going next, and like I said, learn about your family history, learn about your life before what happened today. And I think that's probably the biggest takeaway and the biggest hope for this book, that it will, like I say, not be an end point for scholarship on Milwaukee's Catholic churches, but a starting point. Go out and learn for yourself, learn more about this history and about yourself in the process.
Well said, Al. Well said. And on that note, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude another amazing episode of the Historians Lounge series here on Tales from the Wandering Scribe. I want to give a huge thank you to my friend Al for coming back on the show. And the release date of his book will be October 6th of this year. Absolutely. And if you want to stay up to date with Al, make sure to follow him on LinkedIn and other social media profiles, which I'll provide down below in the description of this video. Al, thank you so much for coming back on the show. I really do appreciate it, and I can't wait to see this book of yours come out soon.
Absolutely. I appreciate it, Gabriel. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome, Al. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, this has been the Wandering Scribe and the Wandering Quill signing out. Wishing you all a wonderful day and urging you all to like, comment, and subscribe to the channel. We have one episode left for the month of July before we go into the August lineup. And August is looking to be pretty good, especially for next month's roundtable. And as a final note, if you want to meet me in person, next month I will be at the Fullerton Library on August 22nd. The time and date will be posted on my Instagram profile. Actually, it already is. So make sure to see me there, as I'll be selling copies of my books, as well as providing information on my next ones coming soon. Until then, wish you all a wonderful day wherever you are in the world, and we'll see you all in the final episode tomorrow. Take care. Have a wonderful day.